Welcome to this talk on how to approach the Primary FRCA. My name is Laz, I'm currently an ACCS CT3 based in the North East London Deanery, and I relatively recently sat both the MCQ and the OSCE Viva. Preparing for the FRCA can seem like quite a daunting task. There's a lot of very new content to cover, and it can at first seem like an insurmountable task. The purpose of this video is to provide you with some sort of clear framework that you can follow, so that you don't have to spend too much time in the pre-contemplative phase, where you're endlessly planning how to tackle the content without actually getting started. Trust me when I say that the FRCA is actually a really interesting exam to prepare for, where you really begin to appreciate the complexity of anesthesia and can start applying it to your clinical practice. So please do your best to approach preparation with a positive attitude. Let's begin by talking about the MCQ. At present, the MCQ consists of 90 questions that you complete within a 3-hour window via an online exam. This is broken down into 30 questions in Pharmacology, 30 in Physiology, and 30 in Physics and Equipment. I'd suggest breaking down your preparation into 3 stages that overlap to a certain degree. The first stage involves an initial lap of the content so that you can get your bearings. The purpose of this review isn't to learn really niche details, but instead to develop a broad understanding of the main concepts before diving in deeper in the second stage. In the second stage, you do a more in-depth review and learn about each concept in much more detail, and this will primarily be guided by the main textbooks. Once you're starting to develop your confidence, you can get in some exam practice and consolidate your knowledge using SBAs and spaced repetition flashcards such as Brainscape. Let's start with the initial review of content. The Cross and Plunkett book is generally thought to be a very good resource for this. I didn't use it myself, but I've heard from plenty of others that it provides good, brief overviews of the main topics. I'd recommend starting with physics, as I feel that physics underpins literally everything in anesthetics. I wouldn't worry about discrete factual recall such as Mach values and partition coefficients, and instead just focus on the broader concepts. You want to get to a stage where you have some understanding of terms like pKa, VQ mismatch, and resonance without necessarily being able to explain each concept in detail. This phase should ideally be done at least 4 months before the exam, and it should be completed within about 1 to 2 weeks. This might seem tight, but it really doesn't take all that long to do a quick lap around the boundary to see what you're working with. When I was preparing for the FRCA, I couldn't find any high-quality resources that covered all the core concepts in a good level of detail. The resources seemed quite fragmented, and I really struggled to piece everything together, which is why I set about designing a high-yield FRCA course as soon as I'd finished my exams. The Pastest FRCA Exam Essentials course consists of over 60 video tutorials on high-yield topics that will give you an excellent understanding of the content for the FRCA Primary. It also has integrated SBAs and mock Viva scenarios so that you can get yourself exam ready. The FRCA is very conceptual, and many of these concepts only clicked when I really visualized what was going on. So when putting this course together, I wanted to ensure that the concepts were communicated in a succinct manner and were accompanied by high production value graphics. You can apply to have the course covered by your study budget and take up to 2 days study leave to complete it. So please do check it out via the link in the description if you think that it may be helpful for you. Moving on to the in-depth review, each domain has its own textbook. I know that seems like an enormous amount to cover, but once you get started, it won't take anywhere near as long as you expect, because you would already have some baseline knowledge from your Stage 1 review. The best book I used for physics was Physics in Anesthesia by Simon Stacy. Please do make sure you take your time with physics, because it does take a little bit of time to digest, but it's also very, very important, and the concepts keep arising in other sections of the FRCA as well. The equipment book on the right is also very good, and when you're going through it, always keep in mind how the physics that you've learned applies to the equipment. Basic Physiology for Anaesthetists by David Chambers is probably the most popular physiology book that's used. It covers all the various body systems, but you should spend the majority of your time studying cardiovascular and respiratory physiology, because these are understandably the main physiology components tested in the FRCA Primary. West's Respiratory Physiology is also an excellent resource. It's very short and quite easy to get through, and really clearly explains the main concepts in respiratory physiology. Peck and Hill is the main pharmacology book that is used for the FRCA. It can also seem a little bit intimidating when you first open it, however the chapters are relatively short and you can get through it pretty quickly. You're required to be able to state various discrete values such as the pKa, protein binding and lipid solubility of commonly used anesthetic drugs, and so I'd keep a list or spreadsheet of these values as you go along so that you can create a crib sheet that you can look back on at the end. There are a couple of other resources that are produced by the college itself. Firstly, they have an online course which they specify takes on average 4 days to complete. You should inquire with your trust to see whether you can take study leave to work through this course. I didn't use the resource myself, but it may be worth looking into. Secondly, the RCOA also releases a guide to the primary examination. This is a slim, light blue booklet which contains some sample SBAs, OSCE and Viva scenarios, which I would strongly recommend looking through because they have been known to come up in the exam. Once you familiarise yourself with the material to some extent, you should get started with SBAs. Both Pastest and Teach Me Anaesthetics have excellent SBA banks that I felt matched the standard of the exam very well. I wouldn't leave it until the last minute to start doing SBAs because the act of going through the SBAs is in itself a learning experience that can help you build knowledge. One of the most powerful resources that I used in my revision were Brainscape flashcards. It's a technique that I've been using ever since med school, and I think it's particularly applicable to the primary, where you're expected to retain a lot of discrete knowledge as well as have a robust conceptual understanding. I'd used resources like Pastest SBAs and textbooks to build the majority of my knowledge, which was then refined further and bolstered by the Brainscape flashcards. They were also particularly useful for filling brief periods of dead time on days at work or whilst commuting. I created a huge deck of Brainscape flashcards that cover the entire syllabus and has since been released as the Brainscape certified deck for the FRCA primary. It is available for you to use and you can access it via the link in the description. Now we're going to move on to talk about the SOE and OSCE. The SOE consists of 4 separate sections, each of which consists of 3 5-minute questions. The sections that are tested are Pharmacology, Physiology, Physics and Equipment, and Clinical. The mark scheme is quite crude. You get 2 points for a pass, 1 for a borderline, and 0 for a fail. There is a maximum possible 48 marks to be scored, and you need roughly 37 to pass. The OSCE, on the other hand, consists of 16 5-minute stations that test a variety of domains, including focused history taking, technical skills, such as performing a machine check, answering questions on topics such as equipment, and an element of brief simulation. There is a maximum of 20 marks that can be scored per station, meaning that the maximum possible score for the OSCE is 320. A score of 220 was required for a pass in the November 2025 sitting. Please note that the content for the MCQ and the OSCE Viva is all the same, it's just tested in a different format. Therefore, it's just a case of revising and practicing in a slightly different way rather than having to learn new content, which is reassuring. FRCA Reveal is an app that is widely used to prepare for the Viva. It has loads of practice examples which are easy to work through. There are some niche examples in there which I wouldn't fret too much about. However, on the whole, it's an excellent resource that helps guide your revision. It also makes it very easy to practice Viva scenarios with friends without having to write them yourself. The Masterpass books are also very popular. They are written out in question and answer Viva format, which helps you keep in mind how you would structure your answers. It's written succinctly, meaning that it enables you to get through the content very quickly. Graphic Anesthesia was one of my favourite textbook resources for the primary. It consists of lots of aesthetic graphs and diagrams that illustrate important concepts for the primary. Each graph or diagram is accompanied by a brief set of notes, meaning that you can refresh your memory on these concepts very quickly. I'd strongly recommend getting a whiteboard or downloading a whiteboard app on your iPad so that you can become familiar with drawing out these diagrams. There are a couple of guideline-based resources that you should make sure you don't forget about. The Quick Reference Handbook is something you've likely come across at some point in your training thus far. It's worth going through the entire handbook and getting familiar with the management of anaesthetic emergencies. I wouldn't worry too much about niche drug doses, but it's certainly worth going through and being able to talk through the management of the more common emergencies. There's a separate quick reference handbook for obstetrics, which you should definitely have a look through as well, because that's a topic that can come up in the primary. Finally, you should also check the Research Council website and have a look through the main guidelines. This includes all the ALS algorithms, such as cardiac arrest, tachycardia and bradycardia, and I'd also recommend having a look at the pediatric and neonatal ALS algorithms. This book on the OSCE by Cyril Mendonca is one that I flicked through towards the end of revision. It looks quite dense, but there's actually a lot of images in it, so you can get through it pretty rapidly if you've already done some OSCE revision elsewhere. I'd probably only use it to really finesse your OSCE revision at the end, rather than reading it cover to cover. The Pastest FRCA Exam Essentials course is also designed for those sitting the Viva. Every tutorial is based on a possible Viva scenario, and I've scripted the videos in a similar way to which I would answer Viva questions on the topic. So whether you're preparing for the MCQ or the Viva, there will certainly be something for you to gain in the FRCA Exam Essentials course. I hope that was useful. As I mentioned at the start, please do your best to enjoy the process, because you really will learn a lot, and you'll find that everything at work seems to come alive a lot more than it did before. If you have any further questions, please feel free to get in touch with me via my LinkedIn page. The link is in the description. Good luck.